Hello everyone. Thank you so much for coming today. And it's my first time in United States, and Austin has been really kind to me. It's lovely to be presenting here at Civo Navigate today. And today I'm going to present on the topic navigating unconscious bias in cloud-native communities. So this topic is not restricted solely to this particular domain. It could be applied to anywhere and any other workplace as well. Also, there will be a lot of scenarios and personal experiences of community members that I will be sharing in this presentation, but it could be really regional specific and not applicable to all. So I really wanted to share my inspiration behind this talk. So a long story short, one of my friends was working for a startup, and she was new to the workplace and was working quite well with the manager. 2-3 months passed and a new manager joins in. That manager never really trusted her with any of her initiatives and used to criticize it a lot. And instead of giving constructive feedback, there was constant nitpicking. So it went to an extent that it led to mental health exhaustion, and she didn't really have any choice but to quit her job. So I was actually looking out for this question that does bias exist in tech world? And I came across this word unconscious bias, and the story begins. So who am I? I'm Aakansha and I'm based in India. I'm currently working as developer relations for Empathy Ops, and I'm also part of the organizing team for Kubernetes Toronto. So these are my socials. Feel free to connect with me. So before we deep dive into the main topic, I want you all to ponder upon this very question. Can you recall a time when you became aware of your own unconscious bias? If your answer is no, it's completely okay. We will be running through different various scenarios in this presentation, and perhaps then you will realize whether you have any hidden bias or not. So let's start with our very first scenario. There was a senior employee, Joe, and his junior, Alex. They went for a conference and gave a duo talk. Later in the Q&A session, the attendees directed questions only towards Joe. In the next scenario, a community event was being planned, and the community manager asked Josh to do all the travel work-related stuff instead of Eva, assuming that she might have limitations. Additionally, she didn't trust her enough to be able to do the work task or any other event task. In the third scenario, Julia had a great innovative story for a CFP, and she pitched into her manager, but she wasn't allowed to go to the conference and speak just because she didn't really have any prior speaking experience. So this reminds me of another story. There are conferences which are generally highly paid or where attendees sometimes do call out the speakers or organizers if they feel certain speakers were not up to the mark like others, which is wrong. We should encourage first-time speakers as well. That's how we will grow together as a community. And to my surprise, there are CFP proposals. So CFP is call for proposals that conferences do. And those proposals explicitly mention that we can't accept first-time speakers. And that's strange, right? So as you could see in all the three scenarios that we talked about, there was some hidden bias. We will understand those, what are those when we discuss about the various types later in the presentation. Now, another question for you all. What is the word that pops up in your mind when I say the word bias? I will give you a couple of seconds and then let's see. So in this slide, there are various words. I could see stereotype, preconception, preference, favoritism, discrimination. So these are few words that pops up. I'm sure there is a lot more, but yeah, these are few to mention when I associate it with the word bias. Now, the main question, what is unconscious bias? And to put it plainly, these are stereotypes that we form for a certain group of people without being consciously aware of it. We all have bias, okay? I have a bias, even you have a bias, because bias is just a preference. So if you have a brain, you have a preference, but not all biases are harmful. You may have a preference to watch horror movies. I may have a preference to watch romance movies, but there's no harm, right? But it becomes harmful when biases leads to unfair advantages or disadvantages for certain group of people due to our very own preferential attitudes. So when most people think of bias, they think of a negative action which is taken deliberately, but that's not true. Sometimes these biases affects our behavior and decisions without us realizing it. So having an unconscious mind doesn't make you a bad person. It just means that you are a human. Everyone has unconscious bias, and the goal is to bring them to our consciousness and navigate them in order to provide a more inclusive and empathetic environment. Now, there's an interesting fact that our unconscious mind can process a lot more information than our conscious mind. And it does it by using shortcuts based on our background, culture, environment, and personal experiences. And it does makes almost instantaneous decisions about everything around us. The snag is it's wrong quite a lot of times, especially on matters that needs rational thinking. So our unconscious mind uses instincts. It doesn't use any analysis. It makes snap judgments of people we meet, categorizing them according to gender, social, and characteristics. And in milliseconds, we judge whether somebody is like us or part of our in-group or an out-group. So for those of you who might not already been inundated with this word in the tech world, it's a simple concept and it's backed up by neuroscience. Our brain has to handle way too much of information. So in order to manage it all, our brain takes the liberty of looking for patterns and filtering for us what it sees as the most important bits, like autopilot. And the brain takes shortcuts. And this can cause us to behave in ways that are not true who we want to be or how we feel we are, and we might not even know it. Now, let's talk about different types of biases, and there is a lot of them, but I will try to cover a few prominent ones which we see quite often. So first is affinity bias. So affinity bias is a type of unconscious bias where we favor people who look, act, and think like we do. So it's human nature to gravitate towards people with common interests or backgrounds and to favor people like us. But it's called affinity bias when we base our decisions or our assessments of people on how much they are like us. So have you heard someone say that they hire based on cultural fit? So it's a vague concept at best. Cultural fit is a way of saying that you want to work with people like them. And that's given rise to workplace cultures that can be unwelcoming to women in the workplace, people of color, and older workers. The next is ageism bias. So it refers to how we think, feel, and act towards others or ourselves based on our age. For instance, a community member who is a high schooler, despite having great knowledge and passion for tech, when attending conferences and meetups, people often look down upon them because of their age. And another community member story to this specific bias is they were working in an organization in their young times as an intern or junior employee. They used to be given very simple tasks and weren't even included in collaboration with the senior employees, due to which they never felt the encouragement to work in that organization. So, but you should understand and have such mindset that even an 18-year-old can maybe teach you something which you are not aware of. So these two examples exemplifies ageism, where individuals are judged or treated differently solely because of their age, regardless of their expertise or abilities. The next is authority bias. So it's the tendency to think that people who are in charge knows more than they actually do. So let's take an example. There was a job interview and there was a panel of a manager and 2 team members, and they were assessing a candidate for a job position. So the manager, being in charge, shares their opinion first and strongly supports one candidate. So team member X says, I feel candidate A is better because they were qualified and had good experience for this position. but the other team member gets influenced by the manager's statement and says, I think we should go with candidate B because our manager finds it to be the best fit. So the other team member got influenced by the manager's authority. Maybe they felt pressured to agree with the manager's choice, even if they had any different opinions originally. The next is confirmation bias. So it happens when we try to seek out and prefer information that supports our pre-existing beliefs. So as a result, we look for evidence that confirms what you already think is true, and rather than considering all the evidence that is available out there. So there was a popular notion while back that DevOps is dead, but where did this whole idea come from? The saying that DevOps is dead came from because of platform engineering gaining popularity. Now, although the facts says that DevOps isn't dead, a lot of people keep saying it. And that's why many folks still believe that DevOps is dead. Now comes the halo and horn effect, which are like polar opposite bias. So talking about the halo effect, let's try to understand this with an example. There was a performance review happening for a candidate. The manager had a positive impression for that particular individual. As a result, they were turning blind eye to any criticism that was coming for that particular individual from the colleagues or customers. And they were unconsciously overlooking the bad practices and making excuses for why the favored candidate is falling behind. So this phenomena is the halo effect. On the other hand, which is the opposite of halo effect, is the horn effect. So it's a form of bias that causes one perception about another person to be overly influenced by one or more negative traits. So for example, someone who has failed a project may be perceived as always being incapable of improving, which isn't necessarily true. Then comes the gender bias, which is pretty known. So let me explain this using this experience. So I was actually having a conversation with one of my friends, and she told me that she and one of her male friend, both same experience level, went to the manager to look into their compensation. So the manager had a very different reaction to basically the same request. So for the male employee, the manager said, yeah, I will look into it. But for the female employee, the manager said, I'm pretty sure you are doing good. It's fine. I'm not looking into it. So this is a classic scenario of gender bias. Even the pay gap between men and women is again a significant example for this specific bias. There's one more story of gender bias which one of my friends shared, that he was part of some organization where in the meeting, the male were so dominant in nature that only they could speak up and keep their ideas forward. What was expected of women were just to jot down the notes. Now, this is an interesting slide which says for male, it says leader, assertive, strong, and driven. And for female, it says supportive, emotional, sensitive, and fragile. So nothing wrong with this slide. Now let's move on to the next slide. I made a slight change to this slide. I basically flipped the words. Now it says for the male, it says supportive, emotional, sensitive, and fragile. For women, it says leader, assertive, strong, and driven. Does anything on this slide feel weird? Flip it to test it. For some, maybe yes, for some, no. But the point is, it's not weird. It's all normalized. And now maybe you're thinking that this doesn't really happen to me, and maybe you're right. Maybe you are a person who manages to intercept those brain shortcuts at exactly the right moments to ensure you are behaving bias-free and consistently with your values, action, beliefs, and all of your actions. It could very well be. But what have you got to lose by double-checking yourself? So if we all start to flip it to test it, we might be so surprised at how often we would choose to behave differently. So just mentally flip whoever you are dealing with for someone else to test yourself, and you are pretty much good to go. Now, another question. Have you thought about the purpose of having diverse teams? Why I'm even bringing up diversity and inclusion? So the whole idea revolves around perspectives. So different people have different perspectives due to their diverse upbringings. There could be an infinite number of perspectives in the world because of all the combinations and permutations. The best companies embrace diversity because it fosters diverse thinking. So having a diversity also brings a lot more to the table, that is creative ideas, and it also brings the emotions and sensitivity side of the situation as well. So we often joke about boards, companies, or speakers, panels consisting entirely of men. Why? Because it represents only one perspective. The joke lies in the lack of diversity. However, the counter to this is when it's not just men, but a diverse group of people with varied experiences, that's when the magic happens. Provided there is a shared set of values and vision. So without shared set of values and vision, all that diversity will fragment into their specific tribes. Then you will need all the diversity and inclusion programs in your companies because you never truly understood diversity in the first place. Now, talking about the solutions, so first is you need to deliberately slow down your decision making because, as I mentioned, we tend to take instantaneous decisions. So you just deliberately slow down. Then reconsider your reasons for that decisions, right? Seeing the pros and cons, doing that flip test, so reconsider. Then you need to question your cultural stereotypes because a lot of times biases happens because of your cultural upbringings and differences. Then you need to watch out each other for their unconscious bias, and you need to show empathy towards others because we are all part of the same community and we all have a common goal that we want to feel inclusive and empathetic towards each other. And the last point is like my personal favorite. It's that you can document how to create education, learnings, values of diversity and inclusion within your organization because it leads to transparency and the employees or the community members are encouraged to inculcate those values within their teams and themselves. And there are two companies that I want to point out who have their values and cultures listed out publicly. One of them is Civo. And if you check them out on their website, they have all their values listed beautifully, and you can see them right there. The next company I want to share about is GitLab Handbook. So GitLab has their entire cultural and inclusivity guidebook publicly available, and I highly encourage you to check it out after this talk. It provides some great insights into how you can act in an inclusive manner and ensure that we work with our teams without having a bias. Now I want to share about a 3-step framework which we can use to counter bias at the workplaces. This is a 3S framework. It's not something official. Rather, I have coined it up myself. But these steps are sure to help you out. So according to the 3S framework, we have shared a blue flag, a shared norm, and a shared commitment. So let's take a look at each one of these steps. So first is blue flag. It's a really friendly blue flag, and it could be used when you want to tell someone that they used a bias statement. So imagine you are sitting in a meeting room and one of the employees says something that you feel is biased. Nobody spoke something about it. Doesn't mean it went unnoticed. That's when you can bring up this blue flag and tell them either in the meeting or privately that what they said was biased. If you feel the comment is neutral, share the feedback in the meeting itself. But if it's not, then please prefer to do it one-on-one. And also understand that feedback is a gift. The next step is the I statements. So basically, when you're doing the one-on-one feedback, you can let the person know from your perspective, maybe by saying, hey, I think you didn't really mean to say what you felt, like what you meant to say, but I felt that it was biased. In that way, the other individual will realize that what went wrong and will try to look out the situation from your perspective. And in this way, you're not directly calling them out either as well. The final step of the 3S framework is to make a shared commitment and towards a common goal. So in this case, the common goal is to reduce, if not totally eliminate, the unconscious biases that might be happening in the workplace. and like working together and helping each other to make each other realize about their hidden bias. So I want to end my talk with this quote, like, opinions are based on experiences. So yeah, practice empathy in all areas of your life. And with this, thank you so much. I end my presentation. Thank you so much for coming.